Classification and naming. Classification. Classification is a method of organizing species into groups called taxa. There are 8 taxa in the modern system of classification. We start off with an individual species. Recall that species are organisms that can reproduce and have fertile offspring, and then a group of similar species fit into a genus, then genera fit into a family, and then order, class, phylum, kingdom, domain, and finally all life. This modern system began with the work of Carolus Linnaeus in 1735. Linnaeus based his classification of species solely on shared characteristics. Scientists have refined the system using molecular homologies and DNA evidence. The classification system. The way life is classified is similar to the way people are classified by where they live. So, for example, the continent is the broadest category. Likewise, the domain is the broadest category of life. Humans and fungus are in the same domain of life, domain eukaryota, but yet there's not a lot in common between people and mushrooms. However, if we consider gorillas, people and gorillas are in the same family, family Hominidae. We have a lot more in common. People and gorillas have a lot more in common than people and mushrooms. Species to domain. In other words, organisms of the same species have more in common than organisms of the same genus. Organisms of the same genus have more in common than organisms of the same family. Organisms of the same family have more in common than organisms of the same order. Organisms of the same order have more in common than organisms of the same class. Organisms of the same class have more in common than organisms of the same phylum. Organisms of the same phylum have more in common than organisms of the same kingdom, and organisms of the same kingdom have more in common than organisms of the same domain. Species to domain. In general, there are multiple related species in one genus, genera in one family, families in one order, orders in one class, classes in one phylum, phyla in one kingdom, and kingdoms in one domain. Note that the species is the most narrow and specific category, and domain is the most broad and general category. Classification. Remembering the order of the taxa from largest to smallest is a useful skill. Use the device below or make up your own. In this case, we use the acronym Dear King Philip can order his family a good supper. Or you could say, Dear King Philip, come over for goodness sake. Note the D is for domain, K is for kingdom, P is for phylum, C is for class, O is for order, F is for family, G is for genus, and S is for supper. These categories are listed from largest to smallest. Binomial Nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature is the formal system of naming a species. Each species name includes the organism's genus and species epithet, by name or descriptive name, to identify it. For example, dogs have their common name, which is the dog. The genus name is the canis, and species epithet is familiaris. Rules for naming. Homo sapiens. The first letter of the genus is always capitalized, so the H is capitalized. The first letter of the species epithet is never capitalized. As we can see, it's a lowercase s. The whole name is italicized, so it's a little harder to write out by hand. And then both the genus and the species epithet together are referred to as the name of the species. We are never just called sapiens.